Hello there guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we are back again with our 2023 December champion ranking series, the year-end champions, and we have made all the way down to video number 12. So this time around we're going to be looking at top 10 Battlegrounds attackers according to me, effectively currently. Also, some ground rules for this. We are going to be primarily looking at the performance over the past 6 months. So there are champions who typically are great for Battlegrounds, but have been, just completely robbed by the metas for like majority of the time over the course of the last 6 months. That is also obviously something to be taken in consideration. That is not to say that this list isn't going to change depending on what we are going to see in the future. In many cases, we still see the same champions excelling more and more, but in just as many cases, we see some champions absolutely shine in some metas and then get left aside in some. And then we see champions who are, in theory, on paper, absolutely amazing, but just never seem to work it out with the nodes properly. In addition to all of this, this is a list that takes a look at how many of the top matchups these champions do, how fast they do it, how safe they do it, how much block damage or chip damage is typically involved with their fights, and so on and so forth. There is no single one type of ranking that, we're going to be comparing who is the fastest Battlegrounds champion or so on and so forth. We are looking at many different things here, and I will try to justify my picks the best I can. That said, there will inevitably be a lot of personal opinion and speculation in my personal experience in these lists. 100%. It's impossible to go without it. Therefore, your lists will probably not look like mine. They might look similar. They might look completely different. You will think that I'm undervaluing some champions, guaranteed. I get those comments in every video, and that's fine. I might be, but I can't be pleasing everybody whenever you make a list. Some champions need to go on top. Some champions need to get left out, ultimately. As long as you stay constructive, everything's fine. You can give all of your feedback to me, and I'll gladly read through that. So, let's jump into May and start taking a look at some champions that, in my opinion, didn't quite make the top 10 list. And number one most notable champion probably here would be CGR. I think he's a great attacker. I think he is in spots, in between 10 to 15 for sure. Whenever he does work, he is one of the most dangerous champions to bring in. And he is pretty much the fastest, or one of the fastest attackers that we have in the game. The problem with CGR is in between a mixture of his matchups. He does plenty of them fine-ish, but there are plenty of crucial matchups where he isn't quite working as well, as there are plenty of metas that kind of force him to sit out or be somewhat inconvenienced. So he's definitely extremely powerful champion, and if you are a hardcore CGR player, I believe you are making him work when perhaps, he isn't necessarily meant to be great in that meta. And that can be the case, of course. Ultimately, I do think he's spending too much time on a bench. And that is coming from somebody who does have a rank 5 CGR as well. One of the champions that I heard people advocating for quite hard has been Silk. And I'll be honest here, I don't have the most offensive Silk experience out there for sure. My 6-star is still only rank 4, and Silk kind of has to be ranked up as high as possible to get the best out of her. But at the same time, it is also possible for me to judge many of these champions by how many times I lose to them, or how hindered I am by them, or how, likely I am to ban them, or how terrified I am of them. And in most of the cases, Silk hasn't necessarily been a major problem for me. Therefore, I'm obviously wary of Silk. I understand she's very good, all that stuff, but I don't think she's quite up there yet. Maybe that will change. I do think the fact that she can do Onslaught incredibly well is going to be helpful for her, as well as potentially some, new matchups in the future. Who knows? But I did not include her in my list. Another champion that maybe could have made it, but again, this is a champion that we just don't see anywhere near as much as we would. And you'd think that in many of the metas where she technically does work, everybody would be running her. But it's the hardcore Ghost players who do run her And even when she is being used, I still think she's getting completely screwed over by AI. There are still major consequences of Kabam directly releasing champions, with design to counter her. And reality with Ghost is that, yeah, if we see a meta where there are some damage over time effects or some enhanced special nodes or something like that, Ghost does shine for a bit, and then she kind of disappears again. And I think she has been just overall too inconsistent, and she's definitely nowhere near the, not that it is a main criteria, don't think she is anywhere near the top popular champion Battlegrounds attacker list either, due to the skill requirement needed. And ultimately, that definitely has resulted in significantly reduced presence and also the intimidating factor as for a champion. Like, even right now, I do see some of the best Ghost players in the world who do have Ghost in the deck as a 6-star rank 5 ascended. And I don't think I have had fight against anybody using Ghost against me this meta. And I have played quite a lot this meta. Maybe somebody used Ghost once against me. I have seen her in some of the decks, not too often. But, she's just not doing that well at the moment and hasn't been doing that great over the past 6 months, in my opinion. So did not include her in the list either. Another champion that I do have personal bias towards, and I always enjoy the champion a lot, and I love any meta where she does work excellently well, and that is Black Cat. Now, Black Cat is a solid Battlegrounds attacker in any given meta, to a point where plenty of people are running her, but obviously she excels in the metas where she gets to utilize her ability, accuracy stuff against every and any champion, and that kind of supercharges her. So she's moving from a top 10 spot to top 20 spot or something like that. Top 10, top 20, depending on the metas. Overall, though, I do think we have seen a relatively stable presence of her. And I personally, honestly, just absolutely love the champion. Now that she's out as a 7-star, she's also going to be one of my next rank 2s, to be frank. But I did not include her up there just quite yet. Another skilled champion that we need to take a look at offensively is Stealth Suit SpiderMan. And the Stealth Suit SpiderMan, again, has been great. He has been putting in work in a ton of different metas and seasons, and he is a scary champion to go up against. He can finish fights tremendously fast, and he was very, very close to making that list. Another special shout out to a champion who arguably has the best matchup ratio in the game, and that's Hood. He pretty much does the most matchups out of any champion that's relevant to Battlegrounds. If not the most, then one of the most. I actually need to sum it up still. That's one of the things that I owe to one of my subscribers. But Hood is just insane in terms of the fights that he can take. His problem can be speed at times, can be skill requirement, and obviously he's far from the most popular BG attacker either. But yeah, 6-star rank 5 ascendant Hood is something quite terrifying to go up against in a draft, because there's hardly any defender that you can draft that he wouldn't be able to do at least well. So when you're going up against Hood, you need to make sure that you do not have an appropriate matchup, but you also have a faster matchup than your opponent does. If he had, slightly higher damage output in a generic meta, he'd definitely be in the top 10 as well. So let's move on in our top 10. And another thing that I should have made clear as we are discussing the top 10 Battlegrounds attackers, these are champions with little to no defensive value. So there will be champions like Hulkling, like Kingpin, that will be in the dual purpose champion list. I'll probably extend it to top 20, to be honest, because there are a ton of champions who have plenty of offensive and defensive value. And for most part, I will try my best not to break that rule. That said, again, many of these will be up for debate for sure, and I'm kind of cheating on spot number 10, because in spot number 10 I combined two champions. I have Starkhand, SpiderMan, and Hulk both being up in spot number 10. And the reason for it is because I do think I see Hulk slightly more often, but Starkhand and SpiderMan has gained quite a large amount of popularity, specifically at the top of the Celestial 5, Celestial 4, and top of the top players. Hulk is definitely more popular in the mid to lower tiers, and also, still present in most of the decks in general. However, there are kind of fairly big distinctions in using both of these champions, which I think kind of lands them in similar place. Dark Enhanced SpiderMan has some of the best matchup ratio in the game. I believe he's in like 3rd place in this spreadsheet because he does a ton of fights, including of the new ones. He really does take way more fights than Hulk does, and he does them arguably faster in most cases as well. The problem with Dark Enhanced SpiderMan is that him being incredibly fast and him taking a ton of matchups comes with quite significant drawbacks. He's super squishy, so in many cases there is a very decent amount of chip damage comparatively speaking involved when people are using Dark Enhanced SpiderMan, and also any mistakes are typically like lethal. Like even missing a parry and taking some hits in a block does have quite big consequences. So he's one of those champions that you have to be super confident, things have to go right, and you cannot make mistakes, but when you do play him, a lot of great things will happen for you, without a doubt. And this is kind of where I feel he lands currently in the game. Maybe, obviously if you are a tremendously experienced and amazing Dark Enhanced SpiderMan player, could be higher. He is a scary champion to go up against, like any champion in these lists. And there are also surprising amount of times when you end up winning matches against Dark Enhanced SpiderMan where you think you'd absolutely lose those fights just because they took a hit on a block, or just a hit absolutely demolishes his health pool. And when I say these champions have no to little defensive value, it doesn't mean that they can't catch somebody on defense, because we will have champions here that we do end up placing on defense fair amount of time, but it's never what we draft them for. It's more so than making best of bad situation type of defenders. And when it comes to Hulk, Hulk's kind of opposite of that. Hulk is about as simple as it comes. You just, get to your level 2, you drop it, and then, ideally stun lock the opponent and finish off the fight. Hulk is much easier to use. He doesn't have as many matchups as Dark Enhanced SpiderMan has. That's one negative of him. The second negative of Hulk is that your fight might look drastically different depending on RNG. And that's one of the things that I don't see people getting talked about. And don't get me wrong, I love my Hulk. I have a rank 2 7-star Hulk. He was one of my first rank ups, and I have been using him a ton, and I think he's amazing. I think the thing that kind of drags him down somewhat is, the RNG thing. How quickly you're going to build up your Furies is a massive, massive factor in him. And also, so much depends on whether your level 2 is or is not going to crit. Because then, if the level 2 crits, he's potentially one of the best champions offensively, but most of the time it doesn't, because the crit rate is not great. Obviously, he's kind of tuned around it. In general, he's not the most versatile. He doesn't take as many matchups as Dark Enhanced SpiderMan. There is a bit of RNG element, but again, at the same point, he's much, much, much simpler, super effective, and kind of more reliable, just significantly chunkier. Obviously, when he is awakened, he can catch champs on defense. He is placed on defense more often than many of the other champions in this list, but that kind of primarily goes just to his tankiness, and I chose not to move champions like that to that dual purpose list, because virtually any champion can take Hulk. It's just a matter of how fast it's going to happen. And I think they both share kind of spot number 10. Spot number 9, I am going to give to Sunspot. And this is one of the champions that I just seem to have like some sort of bad karmic relationship with, because I always end up obtaining him late. I never like really got into Sunspot. I never like maxed out my 6-star. I don't have a 7-star. But this is also a champion that in most metas is one of the most terrifying champs to go up against. In some of the matchups, like, when you get to do Kingpin with a Sunspot, or Nick Fury with a Sunspot, or some other champs, it's just brutal. Sunspot can do Sunspot things, and if, again, you let it happen, it can be absolutely crazy. The deal with Sunspot is, though, he's not necessarily going to work in that many of the metas. There will be, complications using him. He doesn't cover the largest amount of matchups either, but he's kind of like CGR levels of fast. And unlike CGR, he does exist as a 7-star. And that obviously means that there is more of a future there. There is increase in the speed if you do have him at the rank 3. Like, rank 3 Sunspot is absolutely terrifying champion to go up against. At the same time, there are ways around it, and I feel he's about somewhere here. If you do obviously have a rank 2, rank 3 sunspot, you might feel higher. Therefore, I try to be as open as I possibly can. And, you know, also include the champions in these lists and mention the champions that I might not have necessarily the most experience with. And a lot of this list also takes, you know, from my experience going up against these champions. And this is where I kind of feel Sunspot lands. And next up, I'm putting in Archangel. And to be honest, like virtually all the champions that do make in top 10, I think are relatively interchangeable. Maybe the top 3 I would feel quite strongly about, but everything in the middle of this list, I think wildly varies. Archangel is one of those champions where he can be locked up. He can be made useless with correct drafts. At the same time, there are so many champions that he counters. And what's the best way to explain the effect of Archangel is, I think he's the single most devastating champion that causes losses. Because it's also a psychological factor when you go up against Archangel. When you see opponent drafting Archangel, you try to draft bleed or poison immune champions. Champions Archangel can't do. And that often compromises your draft, rather than tanking it head on or trying to race him because of how ridiculous he can be. And then you end up messing up your own draft. And it's just an awful thing to happen. I have lost more matches to Archangel, I think, than any other champion. And not necessarily just because, you know, opponent Archangel's the champion down faster than I do my fight. Just because it messes with you, and then you end up in round 3 when opponent has Archangel and you have no choice but throw down something that Archangel can do, and you're done. So that's one of my advice actually going up against Archangel is, you know, more often you're going to be better off taking him head on and trying to race him than, you know, trying to run away and trying to get the bleed and poisons immune champions, especially, you know, if you haven't kind of like specifically thought about it when building your deck. Archangel in general, again, has his weaknesses, but he does work in tremendous amount of metas. He just does, because of the things that he bypasses, because of his ability accuracy reduction, because of the fact that his damage is coming from damage over time effects. Again, there will be champs and matchups that he cannot do, but he works often, without a doubt. And when he does work, it's just awful. That's like the best way to put it. Because he definitely does ravage through decks and ravage through Battlegrounds. And he's absolutely devastating to go up against. Next up, Human Torch. Now, Human Torch, 6 months ago would have been like in first spot or second spot, something like that. One of the top spots for sure. And Human Torch also has defensive value because you can legitimately trap your opponents with Human Torch, which I still find kind of hilarious. The downside, the problem with Human Torch kind of comes from the block damage, and that is also the player's fault, though, much more than anything else. And let me explain that. People see Human Torch as this tremendous, insane nuke that will take down champions significantly higher their rank, and he will, but he immediately becomes significantly less scary then. The key thing kind of with Human Torch is to have him rank appropriate, right? Because for whatever reason, Human Torch is so powerful that people expect the 6-star rank 3 or 6-star rank 4 Human Torch to go up against 7-star rank 2s and 3s and, like, you know, be this absolute destruction machine. And to his defense, he kind of does. The only difference is you end up taking some more block damage, because with Human Torch, if you bring him in appropriate matchup, the longer the fight goes, basically the higher damage is, because you build up your smolders and the Incinerate does more damage. So, you know, he's going to finish those fights, even if a 6-star rank 3 is going up against the 7-star rank 3. Or 7-star rank 2. The problem is going to be all the chip damage that you add along the way, and that likely being the reason you lose, as well as obviously the reduction in speed, which is inevitable, but that's not that big of an issue. At the same time, obviously, rank up your Human Torch to the highest rank possible, and you will see great things. Now, currently, obviously, we have energy resistance that is hindering him, but in general, he does have a great list of champions that he can do extremely well against. We do have his defensive tricks, and one of the coolest things about Human Torch is that he will go from one of the best champions in any matchup where he's kind of, you know, intended and suited for, to at least a decent and respectable champion in matchups where he might not necessarily be meant for, because nobody's really immune to his Nova Flames. His Nova Flame and pre-fight ability is a massive issue for the game mode of Battlegrounds, which I believe DLL has discussed quite a lot. And it's an interesting piece of conversation, which, I would love to hear your thoughts as well, because obviously Human Torch was not designed with Battlegrounds in mind. And if Human Torch would be designed today, there is no way they would let us have the Nova Flame for every Battlegrounds match. Because, we all see how it ended up working. Human Torch, Nova Flame, go in and pretty much dodge on anybody. This is like a clear-cut example of a game mode coming to a champion and champion having unintended power burst, because his pre-fight ability was always tuned that you will have to make a choice when to activate it, when it's most advantageous to you, like a long quest or alliance quest or anywhere else really. Now with Battlegrounds, that choice requirement is eliminated. Every fight is a Nova Flame fight. And, that has had a very, very significant impact to his overall capability and speed and matchups and everything else. And it shows. So he inevitably is in the top 10 list. Again, there are some issues with him. Perhaps he should go higher. But again, I am taking in consideration the overall performance of the champions over the 6 months. And there have been plenty of things that do kind of stall him, because I do think that's by design, though. To be fair, I do think a lot of those metas have been by design to stop him. Like we have had Crit Me With Your Best Shot meta where Human Torch does nothing, and now we have Massive Energy Resistance meta where Human Torch does nothing, and we have had a handful of others where Human Torch just isn't quite that. But overall, it's impossible to deny the champion's power. He's one of the biggest and most scary nukes in the game. Right, let's move on. Kate Bishop. And Kate Bishop is not necessarily just as fast. Kate Bishop is slightly slower than many of the champions below in this list, but Kate Bishop is as high in this list for a specific reason, that she works majority of the time against a ton of matchups that typically are super hard, and she does it extremely reliably. She does have AI manipulation mechanics in her. Obviously, she primarily does damage through Cold Snap, which is a passive, which does shut down Evade. And then she does have her, Evade mechanics, ability to bypass miss. And she has been, one of the successful poster childs of 2023 MCOC. Takes, so many random fights, and she always has to be respected, and she's fast. And currently, we are enjoying a breather from Kate Bishop because, quite honestly, just like a while back with Archangel and Human Torch, I already got tired of banning Ascended Kate Bishops. And now, because of Necropolis, there are significantly more of them, and she will inevitably be a very, very big problem very, very soon. Again, count me on that. She's not going to be good for the Polka Dot power node, but pretty much past that, you're probably going to see her back in every Battlegrounds deck and just wrecking champions left, right, and center. So I do think Kate Bishop, at the moment, purely as a Battlegrounds attacker, takes the spot number 6. Now we're going to move on to the top 5. And I think top 5 is kind of solid. They are, well, maybe you can slightly debate it, but I think Scorpion is in 5th place overall. If we take a look at the last 6 months, obviously, there have been some of the metas where Scorpion hasn't necessarily been as great, but in general, the man performs much more often than most in the game, and he has so much flexibility and, just capability to dispatch a ton of opponents. Like in the current meta, Scorpion's pretty much an auto draft because he does the most ridiculous fights the best. And that will carry on in future. Like next metas, we're also going to have Polka Dot Power, where he's going to work great with Power Shield and all that other stuff. And again, in most cases, it has pretty much never been a meta, or hardly ever there has been a meta where Scorpion doesn't work at all. And I think that's what kind of, pushes him forward. Scorpion is one of those champions that seemingly always finds a way to do, at the very least, well enough. And pretty much That can be said for most of the champions in this list, maybe aside from a top pick, but I think it was impossible to deny that champion the top place because of how devastating the champion is. So, Scorpion having access to direct damage with poisons, to energy damage with shocks, to rapture damage with physical damage through raptures. Obviously, the corresponding immunities, Petrify, Taunt, ability to block unblockables, and perhaps the most notably, ability to heal like an insane machine and pretty much always finish the fight with 100%, which kind of compensates for him not being quite as fast as, let's say, Torch or some of the other champions on this list. But every time you go up against Scorpion and you finish the fight even with a little bit of chip damage, you're just terrified because you know that chances are opponent's going to finish with 100% health, and definitely the scoring system changes have also helped Scorpion to excel even further, in my opinion. Okay, so what's better than that? I think specifically speaking about Battlegrounds attack, Massacre has been crazy. And he has worked with the nodes plenty well, and at the moment he's on fire, and he's going to carry on being on fire for the next 2 months guaranteed, because he works extremely well with pretty much all of the rest of the nodes, having access to polka dot power, having access to dot effects, or being a skill champion that will purify everything down. And he has pretty much been working non-stop. And if 6 months ago I would have put Valkyrie above Massacre potentially, in terms of how well they are compatible with Battlegrounds, the last 6 months have really kind of been very punishing to Valkyrie for one reason or another. I don't know exactly why, but she just never seems to catch a break. And in vast majority of the metas, again, 6 months ago, Valkyrie would have been in this list for sure. Right now, I think Massacre has kind of taken her place for most part. And yeah, another champion we see ascended a ton, another nuke that does a ton of matchups that you would never think he can. He has so many offensive weapons in between access to bleeds, in between access to incinerates, and ability to maintain a ton of dot damage. Even when you go up against incinerate immunity, he has plenty of red numbers. Obviously, there's a massive level 2. There is an ability to gain power hitting through hitting opponent's block. And yeah, it's kind of unexpected, the glow up, the increase in usage and popularity that you have seen. But at this point, in most of the metas, most of the time, you see maxed out Massacre in pretty much everybody's decks. Some metas he works slightly better, some metas he works slightly worse. For instance, like in current meta, he shouldn't work necessarily. We have massive energy resistance taking away his incinerate damage, which, you know, is felt and he isn't as great. But despite all of that, despite him having no ability to mitigate opponent's power gain and all that stuff, he still is present, he still does the work. And that's in a meta where he isn't particularly great. And there are plenty of them where he is. And then obviously, you know, just him taking ridiculous amount of matchups in between, you know, random man things or hindreds or whatever. And yeah, I think Massacre is up there, and I think he's very, very scary to go up against. So we're going into our top 3, and in spot number 3, I'm putting in Tigra. When it comes specifically for Battlegrounds, Tigra is an absolute menace. One of the fastest attackers, inappropriate matchup, probably the fastest attacker. The things that do bring Tigra down at the moment, I would say, is the fact that she's relatively squishy, and addition of 7-star champions hasn't been tremendously helpful to her. So she kind of suffers from similar things that Stark Enhanced SpiderMan perhaps does, not quite as much. And obviously, Kabam has been after neutralized. It's just impossible to deny it. We have plenty of nodes coming that, you know, either increase defenders' ability accuracy or make them immune to defensive ability accuracy reduction. We have plenty of champions who have those abilities in their kit. We have champions coming out with neutralized immunity even now. And, you know, those effects are kind of noticeable. Again, I think if not for that, she could potentially be the most dangerous Battlegrounds attacker, at least one off. But despite all of that, she's still, you know, she's still proving her worth without a doubt. And the best example here would be that she absolutely destroys Onslaught, for instance, because she can just nuke him down like nobody's business. She absolutely does destroy Maestro, for instance, because again, she can just nuke him down, nobody's problem. Both of those fights, ironically, are high risk, high reward fights where if AI doesn't cooperate with you, they can go wrong, very, very wrong, very fast. But she can also take both of them down in like 35 seconds. So, you know, there is a danger to using her. And if you are a good Tigra player, congratulations, you are winning in this game a lot. And if you're not a good Tigra player, you better learn how to use her, because I do not think that, you know, she's going away anytime soon. In between the ridiculous speed, increase in power gain, the buff controllability, access to raptures, and not that many champions being immune to raptures, still, you know, I think she's going to be around for a really, really long time. Unless, you know, 6-star is the best we get and she never gets released as a 7-star. But, you know, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. It didn't really affect these rankings much. And again, this is specifically an offensive ranking list. Spot number 2, champ, offensively, over the last 6 months, I think, has been Titania. I think Titania has been absolutely plowing through champions right now, to a point where Titania was considered like a solid science champion. Titania was considered to be like, you know, bottom of top 10 science champion upon, like, I don't think most of the people thought she would be like a top 10, or maybe she was bottom of top 10 science champion after getting released. And she just continued to go from strength to strength to strength and kept on climbing further and higher and higher. And again, Titania is the queen of the matchup sheet. And unlike some of the other champions that are relatively high there, she pretty much has no downside to it. Like when I described with Stargirl and SpiderMan, there is the, you know, squishiness of him. There is the risk factor, and there is a very high skill requirement with you being able to ramp him up quickly. With champions like Sandman, you know, realistically, Sandman does a ton of fights. He's just too slow to really function. And most of the champions up here have some sort of drawback. Even like Hercules, you know, he comes with some of the risk. You need to be able to intercept very, very well, and that can go wrong with the current AI. Titania just doesn't really. You know, Titania, you can bring in so many different matchups, and you can just push to your level 3, and then you can start nuking. And even if they throw their special attack, which is one of the biggest problems with Titania, in most cases, you can still just tank that level 3 because, you know, you're still indestructible and unstoppable. And after that, you can have a go at them. That is one of the biggest problems with Titania, however. The fact that Intimidate debuff seems to be like a placebo debuff. It really doesn't seem to be doing much in the game at all. And it's kind of like extremely random what opponents will do. It has gotten slightly better recently, but, you know, it's the only thing that's kind of providing her with some inconsistency. But again, if we're talking about specifically last 6 months and how these champions have done, I think Titania is one of the best Battlegrounds offensive champions over the course of the last 6 months. That has obviously to do with the fact that Kabam had been helping out science class. That has to do with the fact that, you know, mystics are often present and extremely dangerous in the Battlegrounds. All of those things do matter. Of course, all of these things do affect these rankings, but she's just been filthy. She currently is filthy, which is another reason why I look forward to the next 2 months, where she likely will be sitting on the sidelines for a while. Next 2 months, she likely isn't going to be doing too well, looking at the metas, which again, I definitely look forward to. And then if you look at the last 6 month period, who I think overall has been the strongest Battlegrounds offensive champion, and that's Juggernaut. Again, of course, there are some metas where he just doesn't work as long as the debuffs are involved. As that being said, there are many metas where he somehow does work even though he shouldn't have, which was also ridiculous, just proving his speed. But the biggest thing about Juggernaut is that not only he has one of the highest amount of preferred matchups against tough opponents, you know, the fact that he destroys most of the mystics, the fact that he destroys most of the skill champions, you know, be those Atumas. He dispatches him so fast, and he does reduce the damage that he takes, and he has a little bit of a regen with his relic. and ending up with him absolutely rinsing the floor with Atuma, for instance. Absolutely destroying core, pretty much the best core counter in the game, I would say. And able to take Killmongers, able to nuke Nick Furies, able to nuke a ton of different champions. Only class where you kind of want to keep Juggernaut away in most cases is Science, obviously because of the debuffs. For most part, the deal is, if you go up against Juggernaut, you will more often lose than not. And that is the experience. That's also my experience when I use the Juggernaut. You can pull out some ridiculous, ridiculous fights. And now that we have 7-star Juggernauts running around the place, it's just insane. It really is. And I think it's quite hard to deny. And back to the point. Why I think he is the best overall Battlegrounds offensive champion. That's because he not only has a tremendously large amount of matchups that he also is, you know, thanks to his relic, gifted with damage reduction and regen that offsets any cheap damage that you do end up taking. So he's one more of those champions where you often end up finishing the fight with like full yellow bar or almost full yellow bar. And that lets him be so much more aggressive. He's also tanky in general because he has damage reduction mechanics in his kit to start off with. Then he's also a Mystic, obviously. Mystic Dispersion is the thing, but he also has increased combat power rate, which makes him one of the, fastest champions in any kind of nuking situations. Because he has high damage off the get-go, he gets to his level 2s ridiculously quick, and he gets back to them ridiculously quick. And also, those unstoppable buffs do provide you with a really huge sense of safety, with your ability to be aggressive, maintain your aggression, and quite literally, whenever you can use Juggernaut, there's only one thing you do worry about, and it is opponent throwing level 3. As in, like, opponent not throwing their special attacks or something like that. Which isn't, which is an issue for vast majority of the champions in the game, period. But other than that, Juggernaut just destroys. From a top-tier Battlegrounds perspective, I don't think there is a scarier offensive champion than Juggernaut overall. Again, just like Titania, probably not going to be doing too well for the next 2 months or so. We'll see how he does afterwards. But if you're looking at the previous 6 months, the man has just been absolutely ridiculous. And he's, again, one more of those champions that work when he shouldn't. Like, a good example is the victory track meta in the first Lady Circuit meta. Initially tried it out, on paper it looked like it absolutely should not work because of how many buffs he gains and all that stuff. And then I got my butt kicked in like 15 matches by Juggernaut because people pushed through the power gain, people did make it work, and he was still incredible. Because it turns out once you do get up to his 10 buffs in most of the fights, you don't really, lose too many of them, so you can handle the power gain relatively fine. And Juggernaut was whipping my ass left, down, right, and center all across the aisle. And I felt betrayed by him. Juggernaut's also, and full disclosure here, one of my favorite champions in the game currently, and has been pretty much since I started using him for Battlegrounds. And there is a very, very good reason for it. It's because he's one of the best, if not the best, Battlegrounds champion in the game overall, and definitely offensively, in my opinion. So that has been my list. I know that, this is, again, subjective. I completely get that. I completely understand. But here's a write-up of it, and I look forward to hearing all of your issues with this list. And I look forward to reading your own lists. See you soon, guys. Bye-bye. Hello there, guys, and welcome back to the channel. So we have all the information about